Right to Life Radio with John Girardi on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400, a production of Right to Life of Central California. And now, here's your host, John Girardi.
Well, Facebook is doing it again. They're censoring all kinds of pro-life content, and the people they're using to so-called fact-check a bunch of pro-life pages on Facebook, the people they're using to fact-check it are partisans who directly hate the particular parties that are being fact-checked to begin with. You're listening to Right to Life Radio here on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. I am John Girardi. I'm the director at Right to Life of Central California, rtlcc.org. Joining me, as always, my good buddy, the CEO of California Family Council, Mr. Jonathan Keller.
That's me, your good buddy,
All right.
Your compadre, your amigo.
Yes, we are the Dos Amigos. Okay, so let's get into this story. Now, we've talked a good bit on this show and a little bit on the John Girardi Show, which you can listen to every evening from 6 to 7 p.m. Separate thing, but, just thought I'd mention it since I'm heavily involved in both of these gigs. About the troubling and perverse role of major tech companies who dominate the media through which people receive and consume much of their information and news and opinion. Twitter, Facebook, and Google being the big three, the three most powerful entities in that realm, and three of the worst offenders in that realm, in all of their various different ways. Facebook recently was involved in censoring a bunch of posts from Live on the question of whether abortion is medically necessary in certain circumstances. Lila Rose, who runs Live, was posting stuff basically saying that there are a bunch of doctors who are of the opinion that abortion is never medically necessary. It's never medically necessary. Now, I would say that if you have a large group of doctors who are positing a certain opinion about a certain kind of medical practice, even if it is an opinion that is rejected by, let's say even the mainstream of the medical community, I think you can have I think it is a legitimate thing for that opinion to be aired and heard. Certainly, the dominant medical community has been wrong about things before. Just go look at an old food pyramid from the early 1990s and you'll see exhibit A through Z. Yes, eat 11 servings of grain every day. And then we wonder, hey, how come everyone's so fat? It's because they're eating so much bread. I don't know how even when I was a kid, I thought that was a ridiculous amount. And I love pasta more than like anyone else. And even I thought 11 servings of grain a day was completely nuts. So anyway, regardless, boy, that's a segment. That segment's just red meat for Sharon Girardi, who I hope she's listening to this. Regardless, you're allowed to have debate about there's if you're gonna host a forum for letting people talk about stuff and letting people debate stuff, if you're going to have some kind of fake news monitor, then you should not probably be applying it to things where people are having legitimate disputed opinions. And it's not just total hayseed quacks who are wearing tinfoil hats. It's actual doctors. They're actual doctors who say, I don't think abortion is ever medically necessary. Okay, I think that's a legitimate argument to hear. Let's hear it. Let's hear why they think that. Let's hear that viewpoint expressed. But no, instead, Facebook decided to use various fact checkers to check on some of the facts posited by Live on their Facebook page. Now, it seems noteworthy to me that Facebook seems to be monitoring what Live does, or what Prager University does, or what not that I'm like a huge unmitigated fan of Prager University or anything, but it seems interesting that Facebook seems to be most carefully, critically noting what is being said on right-leaning Facebook pages as opposed to left-leaning ones. Facebook took down a couple of Live posts or labeled them as presenting fake news in some way. And they based it off the testimony of certain fact checkers whom they used to analyze those statements. One of the fact checkers they employed, who has been talked about on this show, is Dr. Joshua Grossman. Who is Dr. Grossman?
Well, he's aptly named.
It's kind of unfortunate because there was a kid I went to school with like in first and second grade, and his name was Joshua Grossman. And he was really funny, and I really liked him a lot. And I don't think this is him, given that he was like a year younger than me. I'm pretty sure Dr. Grossman is a couple years older than me and a doctor who lives in San Francisco. Anyway, Dr. Joshua Grossman is a professor at UCSF and he does a lot of research on abortion and abortion as a matter of public policy and on late-term abortion specifically. In fact, David Daleiden released an op-ed piece where he looks at documentation and records and draws the conclusion that Dr. Grossman is in all likelihood, this is David Daleiden's argument, it's based on his records. I don't know how accurate David is. He's certainly been right about a lot of things lately.
As has even been proved in court earlier this week.
And we might talk about that a little bit. Basically, he was looking at the records and saying, in order for Dr. Grossman to obtain these specimens that he is obtaining of fetal tissue, he is in all likelihood delivering these babies and then killing them outside of the womb, which is defined as murder, I believe. In
technical definition.
Yeah. That is called murder. So, and you can get prosecuted for that, even in California. Well, not in California, because Joshua Grossman is beloved by the pro-choice public policy left in California, and I'm sure if an attorney general tried to prosecute him, Planned Parenthood would have something to say about it. Anyway, so Dr. Grossman, who is a key partisan in national debates over abortion policy, Dr. Grossman, who is the lead guy testifying every single time for SB 24. Dr. Grossman, this same Dr. Grossman, who may himself be directly involved in these kinds of late-term abortions and stuff, he himself was asked by Facebook to be apparently a neutral fact checker on the question of whether or not abortion is medically necessary in any circumstance.
John, this is just a quick side note. The whole idea of fact checkers, I just have to say, the idea of this that you see on Facebook and other social media platforms now, you see it with Snopes, but I remember when this really started to become more popular, especially during like the 2008, 2010, 2012 election cycles. Mm-hmm. And I remember all of these times where you would have the assumption was that you have these two political candidates, let's say 2012, and just standard disclaimer, right to life, not a
501c3,
blah, blah,
don't
blah.
support or oppose. Yeah.
But you would have these two political candidates that would be talking about something, and the idea would be, well, you've got the Republican view of things, you've got the Democrat view of things, but I, the moderator,
I am above it all.
Candy Crowley, most famously in the 2012 debate between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney.
Who critically intervened, said that Mitt Romney was wrong about something, defended President Obama when actually Mitt Romney was completely correct, and President Obama was clearly obfuscating something.
And in a true sense, Mitt Romney was factually correct.
Yes.
The check of the facts
was
showed,
incorrect.
Yes. But what seems to happen, John, is that the media wants to set itself up as this neutral arbiter of truth.
Right.
And they want to say, yeah, there's the Republicans, there's the Democrats, but we'll give you the facts.
Yes, because all media members, this is actually true, Jonathan. I looked this up. All media members, they're not actually born from human mothers and fathers.
That's true.
They don't have actual human beliefs and emotions and cares and concerns and passions and opinions. Actually, they are formed out of the clay of the earth and they're actually cyborgs into whom we have somehow magically or technologically breathed the breath of life. Their AI is very advanced.
It's like the secular version of the Immaculate Conception. You're saying, they're untainted.
They're untainted by any winds of human opinion or thought or bias whatsoever. They're perfectly clean, tabula rasa, perfectly clean slates. Chuck Todd has never thought anything in his life. And all they do is just deliver just the facts, ma'am. Certainly, Walter Cronkite had no part in the United States losing the Vietnam War by slanting his coverage. No. These people are clean and pure as the wind-driven snow. They have absolutely no preconceived notions of anything. They just give you the facts. And that's why they turn to the Guttmacher Institute for any research they need on abortion, which was literally part of Planned Parenthood and is named after a former Planned Parenthood director. That's why they blatantly lie to protect Planned Parenthood talking points. It's why they blatantly misrepresent the truth when it comes to abortion. So they call upon Dr. Joshua Grossman to be their fact checker. All right. Let me tell you something. Let's try to find a good analogy for this, Jonathan. Who is someone at... This would be like trying to find a neutral opinion about something involving the Lewinsky scandal and asking James Carville. Okay,
Sure.
The guy is a total hack for one side.
I was going to say the president of Philip Morris talking about
tobacco.
Yeah.
The guy who has a vested interest in this thing still being legal and widely available. Yeah, it's completely unreal. We're going to talk a little bit more about some media fact-checking when it comes to abortion. That does not seem to be based in any fact whatsoever. Right after the break, you're listening to Right to Life Radio on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. Show. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Not tuning in. Listening. I need to break this habit. My Power Talk producer for the John Girardi Show pointed out to me, no one tunes in to radio now. They hit a button and they listen. Tuning in implies that this is Right to Life. No one's tuning in. It's just a thing that radio people repeat ad nauseum.
It's a digital tune-in-ish.
I mean, this is a podcast. I mean, there's even less tuning happening. There's no tuning happening. You're just listening to it. Right here on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. Thank you so much for not tuning in, for listening. That's what you're doing. You're listening. All right. That one's for you, Chris. Okay. We're talking about the media's role in fact-checking, as I spit on myself. Jeez, that's some good radio. Fact-checking. I'm glad no one else uses this microphone other than me. Fact-checking. The media is engaged in a bunch of fact-checking of various different pro-life pages on Facebook and even lately statements by the president. And it's really remarkable the kinds of people they are bringing in to do the checking of fact. They all seem to be people who are incredibly biased towards a certain position. For example, Lila Rose's live action, some of her pages have been shut down by Facebook because they got Dr. Joshua Grossman, who's one of the leading abortion researchers in the country, who's aggressively pro-choice, who's trying to mandate that medication abortion be made available at the student health centers of every CSU and UC in the state of California. This is the man who should be objectively and even-handedly assessing the truth claims of what Live Action is saying. And maybe what we should come to the conclusion of is that in very highly disputed questions of medicine or public policy, that maybe we should just kind of step back and let people talk. Let people express their viewpoints as they want rather than trying to censor one side over another. Unfortunately, it's Facebook. They're not the federal government. So, unfortunately, they can do pretty much whatever they want.
However, John, I mean, it is true.
Unless Senator Hawley gets his way, which I'm hopeful.
That's right. Okay, so let me read you briefly, not the whole thing, but I want to read you part of the statement that Live Action just released which you can find it on their website. You go to liveaction.org/US Senate. This was posted just 6 minutes ago from when we were recording this.
All right, awesome.
United States senators issue letter to Mark Zuckerberg condemning Facebook's suppression of pro-life educational videos using a fact check, and they put it in scare quotes, by 2 abortion activists. Senator Josh Hawley, Senator Kevin Cramer, Senator Ted Cruz, and Senator Mike Braun sent a letter to Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg condemning Facebook's recent decision to use 2 abortionists as fact checkers of Live Action's pro-life content, flagging it as false. The letter states, your company, like Twitter, Google, Pinterest, and so many of the other major social media firms in Silicon Valley, has repeatedly been presented with evidence of bias against those with conservative viewpoints, especially on the issue of abortion. And this is the background.
Yes.
On August 30th, Facebook notified Live Action, a leading national nonprofit with the largest online following in the pro-life movement, that 2 videos affirming the widely held view that, quote, abortion is never medically necessary, unquote, were marked as false.
There you go.
This was part of a fact check by 2 abortionists, Daniel Grossman and Robin
Daniel
Schickler.
Grossman. Gosh, was I calling him Joshua the whole time?
You were.
Oh my gosh.
See,
well,
you
there,
can
there.
feel
I guess.
vindicated.
I guess I needed to be fact checked.
There you go.
There you go. Now my friend
Now
Joshua.
that's
now
an-
my friend from 2nd grade, Joshua Grossman, is not on the hook for all these horrible atrocities. It's just Daniel Grossman.
It's just Daniel Grossman.
Okay. I'm really sorry to Joshua Grossman if he still lives in Fresno and if he's still listening. I haven't seen you since we were 8 years old, but my apologies.
I apologize. So you're off the hook. But Daniel and Robin, who both commit and profit from the procedure.
So they are the people fact checking, the people who are actually activists for the cause of legalized abortion.
Right. And the thing, John, that is crazy to me that these senators apparently note and point out is the fact that it doesn't usually seem that there is an error or there is a mistake in favor of pro-life content.
Yeah. These mistakes all seem to go one way. You know, if you had a pro-choice, a prominent pro-choice site that said something like, I don't know, abortion just restores your period, which is, I guess, true, but in a sense, but is highly inadequate. Maybe a pro-choice site that says something about, the fetus being just a clump of cells, which is also true in a sense. It's an incredibly highly organized clump of cells that looks like a human being and it acts and functions like a human being and is a living human organism. Anyway, maybe a pro-choice site that says, a human being is not truly alive until they draw breath. Which maybe there may or may not be certain presidential candidates from small northern Indiana cities who may or may not have said such a claim. That is actually factually inaccurate. Life begins way before you start drawing breath, and it is unequivocally the case that human life exists prior to drawing breath. Okay, or that, regardless, it seems pretty odd how all of these corrections, all of these fact checks, all of these shutting down of pages and censorship in which Facebook participates, and we say this as we're being streamed on Facebook Live, so hopefully we're not quite big enough for them. I think we're not quite big enough for them to notice this, that we're slamming them as we're using their platform. But it seems kind of odd how things are all going in one direction.
Well, and here's the thing, John. You pointed this out, and I think this is a delicate situation on social media transparency and access and everything else. One could argue, as some of our friends, like notably Casey Maddox, formerly from Alliance Defending Freedom, now with the Charles Koch Institute, you could argue that Facebook is a private corporation, and as such, they are not directly subject to the...
They're not subject to the First Amendment.
That is true. That is correct. Just as a newspaper using their opinion page or even their front page, the New York Times or the Washington Post, or the Fresno
they can do what they want.
Freaking Bee.
The Fresno friggin' Bee.
They can, on their front page, they can choose to censor or promote whatever viewpoint they want to do.
Right.
They're free to do that. However, when you try to cloak yourself in this aura of objectivity.
And that's the whole problem. The whole notion that the mainstream media has prompted, and it's a relatively recent phenomenon, that media outlets have pretended to be neutral, have pretended to be viewpoint neutral. Again, maybe not. I think I mentioned this off air, so it's not again for people listening. But it used to be back in the day that newspapers would call themselves, okay, this is the Springfield Republican,
Right.
all right. This is the the Little Rock Democrat. This is the the Ohio
Independent.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Independent. Yeah. Newspapers staked out positions. They were very clearly and readily identifiable with either certain political viewpoints or parties or what have you, and they were open about it. And people could pick and choose if they wanted to listen to them. That was sort of how media worked. And it's actually funny because there's this notion among media types that like when some conservative like activist / journalist guy, that guy Andy I apologies for butchering his name.
Yep.
When he gets beat up
I think
by
NGO, I think how his name is spelled.
Yeah. When he gets beaten up by a bunch of Antifa protesters, there are a bunch of these media people who are rushing to say, well, he's not really a journalist because he's biased.
Yep.
And it's like, well, first of all, let's define how are you defining what a journalist is? I mean, it's not like there's a strict credentialing that takes place. It's not like you've got to, to be a medical doctor, you got to have a medical doctorate and have graduated from a university and be licensed or something. Okay. Being a journalist does not require any of that. It's a relatively low skill set. You just need to be able to string a couple words together.
No, John, I was informed that you had to have a journalism degree in order to be an actual journalist.
Oh, wait. Actually, no, you don't at all. There are a whole bunch of journalists who have like English majors and no journalism degree whatsoever. Anyway, there's no real credentialing for it. And just because someone is biased towards a certain viewpoint does not ipso facto make them not a journalist. There were gazillions of very biased journalists that existed, certainly early in American history and even today. So, this notion that the media is presenting, this is the problem that conservatives have had with it. It's not that the media is biased, it's that the media is dishonest or self-deceiving. This notion that they've all deceived themselves into thinking that they are centrists, that they are viewpoint neutral, that they don't suffer from biases when, if you don't have a single person in your newsroom who voted for Donald Trump, you might not be able to report on him fairly.
Okay.
Just an instinct that I have. Maybe if not one single person that you work with or know voted for Donald Trump, you might not be able to cover him objectively.
So John, just since you brought that up, I want to remind people, we were reading off air the story of Albert Mohler was talking about on his daily podcast, The Briefing. He was talking about this, and he was talking about media bias. And he says, one final note on this story. This is hardly a new development. We were just watching the acceleration and expansion of a pattern that's been present for a long time. If you go back to the presidential election 1972, Nixon carried 49 states. He won by a popular margin of 18 million votes. Mm-hmm. And yet, just weeks after his election, the film critic of the New York Times, Pauline Kael, said, I live in a rather special world. I know only one person who voted for Nixon. Where they are, I don't know. And he says, at least she was honest.
Yeah.
But how hard would it have been when you have someone who won 49 states and the film critic of the New York Times
knows one of them, one person? When we come back, we're going to talk about Ralph Northam. Remember him? He's still the governor of Virginia somehow. And the media completely lying to just in their attempt to slam President Trump. We'll be right back on Right to Life Radio on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. Two guys who aren't high as kites right now. John Girardi and Jonathan Keller here with you on Right to Life Radio.
Thank goodness.
Thank you all so much. Thank goodness. Thank goodness we're living clean, Jonathan.
That's right.
Clean, godly Christian homes. That's where we were raised. We said no to the reefer. Anyway,
that's right.
Moving right along. We actually did. So, in case you think we're joking.
It's
no,
true.
we think marijuana sucks. All right. we are sort of keeping with our theme about the media stinking and being totally biased against the pro-life position. And we're doing so with a kind of interesting case. So President Trump's been on the campaign trail. And by the way, just so people know, this is a 501c3 produced show. We don't take positions on politicians. We don't support or oppose politicians. And specifically as it relates to President Trump, when he does good things, we talk about it. When he does things that we don't like as much, we have talked about it and do talk about it. There have been a few things on the pro-life side where on the issues that Right to Life deals with, abortion, embryo destructive research, etc., where President Trump hasn't quite lived up to what other Republican presidents have done. And I think we have been very fair on this show. I think we're very fair to give Trump credit when it's due and not credit where it's not due.
Objectively. Unlike the fact checkers, we are objective.
Well, we're objective, but we are calling balls and strike. We're totally biased towards certain opinions, and we that is what we serve is that those truths that we believe in, and we try to present the facts as best we can.
And John, just a quick side note on that point. So often the problem that fact checkers get into is confusing facts and opinion.
Yes.
It is the opinion of many pro-life obstetricians and gynecologists that abortion is never medically necessary.
Right.
That is their considered medical opinion.
Right.
And very often when you go to a doctor and you are asking them what you should do, generally speaking, and you say, I can say this and ask you this as the son of two doctors, I very rarely hear doctors say, this is my medical fact of what you should do.
Right. No,
if you're giving a course of treatment,
and
they're
often,
giving an opinion.
And often doctors will say, in my opinion, this is a good idea. Other people may disagree with me.
Right.
And if you want, you can go get a second opinion. Not to say that there's no objective truth involved in the question, but maybe as an outside fact checker who is a journalist who got an English degree, who is not a doctor, who maybe should not be definitively trying to issue a ruling on this in the pages of a newspaper, maybe you can leave some legitimate room for disagreement and say, look, there are differing opinions on this topic from different experts. Why don't we let both opinions be decided? That is not what's happening. Anyway, this is a case where it's not even that level.
It's not opinion. It is actual fact.
This is actual fact.
This is where the fact checkers should be able to objectively say this is what the fact, the historical fact of an event that happened historically.
And by historically, we mean like a year ago. So President Trump has been on the campaign trail giving stump speeches, and often on the stump, he talks about late-term abortion and how he opposes it and how essentially every Democrat except for Tulsi Gabbard opposes it or supports it. He opposes late-term abortion. They support it. He had a rally now, on some of these occasions, President Trump has said that Democrats are in favor of even executing a child after the child is born. Now, executing is a bit over-the-top language, but President Trump is really not too far off. What he is describing is what happens in a lot of late-term abortion facilities where children are born. They either have some pre-existing medical condition or they were harmed in the abortion process. And rather than giving them life-saving care, the abortionist simply does not provide any care for the child whatsoever and lets the child die. Okay, so President Trump is calling that executing. I don't think he's too far off. Maybe in a way you could say they're passively executing the child by neglecting to provide them with the kind of care that they would give to any other child in that situation. So I don't think President Trump is too far off. Nevertheless, when President Trump said this, a bunch of media sources jumped on it and said, ha, President Trump is lying. President Trump is falsely claiming that that's what Ralph Northam and a bunch of other Democrats are supporting.
Fact check false.
Fact check false. Which really is not all that false. Maybe the word execute is not quite accurate. Execute, I think, connotes active acts of killing, but
Like an abortion itself.
like the actual abortion that could have happened 5 minutes earlier and would have been totally 100% legal. But what President Trump is pointing out, I think, is largely true. Maybe his language is a little inaccurate or off color. Well, let's fast forward to just a few days ago, on September 9th. President Trump and this is from a National Review piece by Alexandra DeSanctis. She's our girl. She's a fellow Notre Dame grad. We love her. She writes about all kinds of abortion stuff at National Review. She's a great person to follow and read in National Review. Now, President Trump was talking about Governor Ralph Northam, the still sitting governor of Virginia, in spite of the fact that he went on a radio show and talked about how a doctor who engaged in a late-term abortion, the child survived, and that the doctor and the woman should have a conversation about whether or not the child should be, quote, kept comfortable. Where he's clearly describing leaving a child to die and not providing that child with ordinary care on the basis of the woman's desire whether or not to have this child, this woman who wanted to abort this child. Okay? It was it was completely horrifying. It was completely evil, and it's consistent with repeated efforts by the Democratic Party to oppose legislation that would explicitly require that children who survive an abortion receive the same level of care, the same kind of care that any child born in that circumstances would. Basically, you should not provide a child with less life-saving care simply because the child is the survivor of an abortion. That legislation has been put forward by the Republicans, supported by the president, and continuously opposed by the Democratic Party. Nancy Pelosi has prevented that from coming up to a vote repeatedly. All of the Democrats are standing together on this question,
John,
I think, except for Tulsi Gabbard.
When you say repeatedly that the Democrats have refused to vote on this bill, even vote on this bill,
I mean like 40 times now at this point.
80
times. Yeah.
It's insane.
It's completely insane. All right. So on September 9th, President Trump was at a rally in North Carolina, and he described Ralph Northam as having said, quote, "After the baby was born, the doctor will talk to the mother and make a decision about whether the baby lives." Now, this is a fairly accurate summary of what Ralph Northam exactly said. And here's what Ralph Northam exactly said. Quote, "When we talk about third trimester abortions, these are done with the consent of obviously the mother, with the consent of the physician, more than one physician, by the way, and it's done in cases where there may be severe deformities." I'll add, where there may not be severe deformities.
And just a side note, just the straw man.
Yeah.
The fact that he says, "Well, these are done with the consent of the mother." Obviously.
Well, duh.
Yes, I'm so thank you, Governor Northam. I'm glad to hear that in the state of Virginia, doctors are not murdering children over their parents' objections.
Yes. What heroes? What moral heroes? Or the express objections of the physician were forcing pro-life. Although they do want to force pro-life physicians to do abortions. That's coming up next. Anyway, here's the conclusion of Northam's comments. "If a mother is in labor, I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired. And then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mother." So he's clearly saying that we'll resuscitate this infant if that's what mom wants, but that whether the mom desires to keep this child is influencing the decision about whether we're giving this child life-sustaining treatment. Not the medical necessity or lack of medical necessity of whether or not this child could survive. That's not what he's talking about. So President Trump's summary of this was fairly accurate, but PolitiFact immediately labeled this as false. PolitiFact. So this is what we're dealing with. I mean, News at 11, conservative complains about the media being biased. I get it. But it's a level of bias it's beyond the normal, shading of things. It's gotten to the point of just blatant lying. Just blatant disregarding obvious, clear facts.
Fake news.
Fake news. Thank you. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about David Daleidon's case and some of the stuff coming out of that. You're listening to Right to Life Radio on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Right to Life Radio. Wrapping up with our last segment here. All right. So there's an ongoing civil trial going on against David Daleiden. David, as you may remember, is the guy who took all those undercover videos of Planned Parenthood executives talking very openly about doing illegal stuff, about changing the way in which they perform abortions in order to obtain intact fetal tissue specimens, that is, the body parts of children they abort, and talking very openly about all the money they're going to make from the sale of the fetal tissues to researchers or to middlemen companies that would then turn around and sell it.
How much money, John? If you were going to describe the amount of money they were going to make in like vehicle terms,
maybe like a Lamborghini amount. Yes, that's what one of the Planned Parenthood executives that David interviewed undercover said was, hey, I want to get myself a Lamborghini.
No joke, folks. That is not an exaggeration.
That was not an exaggeration. But no. They're not profiting from this in any way, shape, or form. They just are engaging in something that involves selling of a thing and receiving money for it in a way that earns them no profit whatsoever. So it's totally fine. There's no profit earned whatsoever, but they receive money for something that they are selling to a buyer, and that money is sufficient to allow you to think about buying a Lamborghini. So totally not profiting from it at all. And in case you're wondering, the California law on the subject is that monstrously you may sell the body parts of aborted children to researchers, but you are only allowed to sell the body parts of aborted children to researchers under California and federal law at cost. So the idea that both Congress and the California legislature had when enacting these laws was that we don't want to start creating a market for the body parts of unborn children. We don't want people to be profiting from this. We purely want this to be for researchers at universities to engage in monstrous, horrific research using the bodies of human beings murdered in atrocious ways, which is kind of what Nazis did. Anyway,
which is bad enough as it is, but the idea, John, like you said, was it wasn't even cost. It was basically reimbursement cost. It was whatever the shipping
shipping
is,
and handling. Which is horrible to think about the bodies of children, but that's literally what you're supposed to be paying for.
I hate to be so gross and crass about it, but it was essentially, if you have leftover fetal tissue, if you have leftover pregnancy, remains, you can ship that to somebody, and all you can do is charge for the shipping cost.
For the cost, yes. So, David Daleiden is being sued by various Planned Parenthood executives because he recorded them talking about these things and talking about these things very openly and released all those videos. So now the state of California is suing him on a bunch of allegations of unlawfully recording private conversations, even though essentially every conversation he recorded was in a public place. It was not in private, behind closed doors with just two people there, which is the usual setting for, a quote private conversation. It was at a conference. It was in public places, in a restaurant, where your expectation of privacy is less and where usually you don't have the same protection against someone recording your conversation. So, Obama attorney... Now, here's a very interesting part of the story, that Obama's own attorney general may have intervened to try to get California to try to prosecute or engage in civil lawsuits against David Daleiden. This is from September 10th. Obama Attorney General Loretta Lynch requested the investigation of pro-life undercover journalists who exposed Planned Parenthood's trafficking. This is from LifeSite News. I'm not a huge LifeSite fan, but they have the story. So here we go. Obama Attorney General Loretta Lynch requested the investigation of pro-life undercover journalists who exposed Planned Parenthood's trafficking in baby body parts, a California Department of Justice agent testified Tuesday. Special Agent Brian Cardwell said that Lynch sent a letter to then California Attorney General Kamala Harris. Hey, we remember her. Kamala Harris, currently California's U.S. Senator, currently running for president, asking that David Daleiden and Sandra Merritt of the Center for Medical Progress be investigated. Cardwell was presented at the April 6, 2015 raid of Dalyden's Orange County apartment under a was present at the April 6, 2015 raid of Dalyden's Orange County apartment under a search warrant Harris authorized, he said at the criminal preliminary hearing Tuesday for Dalyden and Merritt. Oh, so this is a criminal hearing. Okay. The raid and search authorized by Harris, now a U.S. Senator and Democratic presidential contender, launched the current prosecution against Dalyden and Merritt. The two pro-life undercover journalists are charged with 15 felony counts of illegal taping of confidential conversations in connection with undercover videos they released in 2015. So, here's one of David's lawyers talking, Peter Breen. We've always said it was a political prosecution, but hearing that Loretta Lynch was the one that instigated it, that's a huge, huge factor, Peter Breen, one of the lawyers representing Dalyden, told LifeSite News. Cardwell also testified under cross-examination by Brentwood Ferreira, a lawyer for Dalyden, that Beth Parker, the chief lawyer for Planned Parenthood of California, urged the Department of Justice agents to seize Dalyden's documents and recording equipment. So, there you go. This was a political thing from the outset. This should scare everybody, okay?
Yep.
Even if you're pro-choice, like the Department of Justice and the state of California picking and choosing based on political favoritism whom they're going to prosecute and bringing a bogus prosecution for taping conversations that were in public. It's nuts. It's completely gross. All right. We'll be back next week. You're listening to Right to Life Radio. We'll see you next Saturday.